The fires of Blackwater still smouldered when the news reached Robb Stark. Stannis Baratheon's fleet was destroyed, his army scattered. King's Landing had barely held, but it had held. The Lannisters celebrated their narrow victory, but they didn't know the wolf was watching. From the north to the Riverlands, Robb had earned the name the Young Wolf, but victory hadn't brought him peace. His father, Ned Stark, had been murdered in the capital. His sisters were still captives, and though Robb had won every battle, he was losing the war, politically, emotionally, slowly. Then came the whispers. Tywin Lannister had marched south, with most of his host, to break Stannis at Blackwater. The capital was vulnerable, weakened, exhausted. The Reach bannermen were still scattered. The city guard had just betrayed their former king, and the wildfire, spent. The city had survived hell, but had no strength left for more. Robb sat in Riverrune's war room when the proposal came, bold, reckless, yet tempting. Roose Bolton laid it before him with that quiet, dangerous voice. Strike now, take King's Landing, end it. Catelyn Stark was horrified. You'd become the very thing your father died fighting. But Robb listened. They called it the River Reavers' March. A daring gamble. Robb would take a fast, brutal force of cavalry and infantry down the King's Road under cover of chaos. A second group, led by Roose Bolton and the Freys, would push east through the Blackwater rush. They had spies in the city, hidden northern sympathizers, and allies in chaos. By the time the Lannisters recovered from their secured victory, Robb's men would be inside the gates. They moved like lightning. The march south was grim. Robb didn't celebrate. He barely spoke. He'd received word Arya had escaped Harrenhal, but was still missing. Sansa was still a prisoner, though now betrothed to some Lannister pawn. Each step toward King's Landing felt like walking toward a past drenched in blood. When they reached the city's outskirts, what they saw shocked even the veterans. The Blackwater Bay was a graveyard of charred ships. The walls were scorched, and half-manned people starved inside. The gates were cracked. No songs of victory, just silence and sickness. And that's when the gates opened. Not for surrender, but because someone on the inside had made a deal. Lord Varys, the Spider, had sent a raven to Robb 3 days before the attack. He offered no allegiance, no promises, just a riddle. What is power, my king in the north? It's where men believe it lies. Varys opened the gates. Robb's army poured in. The Red Keep fell within hours. Tywin Lannister was still en route from Blackwater's edge. Joffrey Baratheon had fled in panic, his mother screeching at him as she dragged Tommen behind her. Seer Mandon Moore died trying to hold the throne room. Seer Lancel collapsed from wounds. The gold cloaks flipped sides faster than whores flipped coin. By nightfall, Robb Stark stood in the throne room. He didn't sit on the Iron Throne. He looked at it. Then he ordered it guarded, untouched. It's not mine, he said. Not yet. But the blood had started spilling. Outside, the Freys were already looting. Roose Bolton had taken command of the city watch and ordered the arrest of every Lannister sympathizer. Black cells filled quickly. Trials would come later, if ever. The small folk cheered at first, another tyrant gone. But by morning, they were cowering again. New banners flew, wolves over red. The North had come not to kneel, but to conquer. And somewhere, hidden in the shadows of the ruined city, Varys whispered to himself, the game has changed. The next morning, King's Landing woke under a different sun. One dimmer, quieter. The streets were choked with ash, broken wagons, dead horses, and the smell of blood that never truly washed away. The gold cloaks patrolled under new command, their lion sigils ripped off, replaced with hastily stitched direwolves. People stared through broken shutters, whispering one name, Stark. Robb hadn't taken the Iron Throne. He hadn't even claimed the crown of the Seven Kingdoms. Not yet. But he had taken the Red Keep. And that meant something more dangerous than any title. He had taken power without permission. The city was reeling. Lannister loyalists were being dragged from their homes. Some were killed in the streets. Others tried to beg mercy before Robb's soldiers, but mercy was in short supply. The small folk were hungry, confused, afraid of what would come next. They had seen kings come and go, but never a northern one, never a wolf in the south. In the throne room, Robb stood with his council. Great John Umber, Lord Edmure Tully, Roose Bolton, and the Frey representatives, Lord Ryman and his smug little sons. Catelyn was there too, and she looked more exhausted than victorious. "Have to stabilize the city," she urged, "before you're seen as another usurper." Roose spoke calmly, eyes cold. "Fear stabilizes better than bread, my lady." Robb ignored them both and turned to Lord Edmure. "Send word to the Vale. If Lysa won't send troops, she can send food. If she refuses, we take what we need by road. Diplomacy ends where starvation begins." Catelyn's eyes widened. "That's your aunt, your cousin. I know who they are." Robb cut her off. "And I know they sat on their hands while my father died." That night, messengers flew like bats from the capital, some to the Vale, some to Dorne, some to distant Essos. Robb wrote one letter himself to Balon Greyjoy, offering legitimacy over the Iron Islands if he pledged support. It was a gamble. Balon might laugh at the offer, or worse, send back a piece of Robb's envoy, but Robb needed time, and every raven bought him a little more. Down in the black cells, Cersei Lannister watched the shadows crawl across her stone floor. Her once silken gown was stained, her blonde hair filthy, her voice nearly gone from screaming at the guards who wouldn't even look her in the eyes. She had been found 2 days after the city fell, hiding in the Sept, clutching Tommen and muttering to the Seven. They'd taken Tommen from her first, then her crown, then her pride. She asked every day where Joffrey was. No one answered. The truth was, Joffrey had escaped, disguised, humiliated, and alone, but alive, and someone was helping him. In a forgotten corner of Flea Bottom, a girl named Shay dressed his wounds and called him boy. She didn't bow, didn't fear. Him, he liked that, until he remembered who he was, or had been, back in the Red Keep. Robb stood before the Iron Throne again. He hadn't touched it since he took the city. Every night he stared at it. Every day he refused it. "You should sit," Roose said. "The people need to see a king." "I'm not king of the Seven Kingdoms," Robb said quietly. "I'm king in the north. And I took this city to save my sisters, not to rule this wasteland. But the north was far away, and he was here." That night, Arya Stark walked through the gates of King's Landing with a group of northern scouts. Number 1 recognized her at first, dirty, wild-haired, silent. But when she reached the Great Hall, she stood before Robb and said just one thing: "You shouldn't have come here." Robb froze. Arya. She didn't cry. She didn't run to him. She just looked past him, at the throne. "Never let you keep it," she said. "Not the Lannisters, not the Tyrells, not the realm." Robb finally sat down. not on the Iron Throne, on the steps beneath it. And outside, storm clouds gathered over the city that could never be ruled without becoming a monster. The third night after the fall of King's Landing brought something colder than wind, silence. Not the peace of victory, but the kind of silence that means something is wrong. The capital held its breath as whispers spread like rats in the walls, whispers of executions, whispers of traitors, whispers of the boy king who vanished in the dark. Robb Stark had taken the Red Keep, but he hadn't taken the people. He was a stranger to them, a northerner, a conqueror. The streets had stopped cheering. Now they watched, waited. In the Tower of the Hand, Robb met Arya again, properly. This time, clean, fed, dressed like herself again. But even then, she didn't smile. "I saw your direwolf in the Godswood," she said softly. "Grey winds never left me," Robb replied. "Good," Arya nodded. "Because everything else has," she told him, about Harrenhal, about the Faceless Man, about Tywin, and the torturers, and the dead boys that didn't have names. Robb sat in silence. At one point, his fist clenched so tightly the goblet in his hand cracked, but he said nothing. Then Arya looked him dead in the eye. "You should have gone home, to Winterfell, not here." The words dug into Robb more than she could know. Because the raven had come that morning from the north. Winterfell had burned. The Boltons had taken the castle under the guise of loyalty. Theon Greyjoy had betrayed them. The castle was in ruins. Bran and Rickon were missing, maybe dead. The north was broken. The Karstarks were furious over the delayed vengeance for Jaime Lannister. The Umbers questioned why their sons were bleeding in the south while their homes burned. Roose Bolton stood at the window, unreadable, as the message was read aloud. "Your Grace," he said calmly, "we must return north." But Robb didn't reply. Not yet. Down in the Red Keep, Lady Catelyn had her own war to fight. Sansa was still alive, and still in the clutches of the Tyrells, who had not left the city but retreated into their manors like snakes in the grass. Lady Olenna Tyrell had requested an audience. Not with Robb, with Cat. The meeting took place in a quiet garden, the air heavy with rose oil and rot. "You know he can't keep this city," Olenna said without preamble. "Your boy is brave, yes, noble, but cities don't love noble kings. They love fear or gold. Your son brings neither." Catelyn replied through clenched teeth, "He brings justice." Olenna sniffed. "He brings the north's cold wind, and it will choke the south before it chills the Lannisters," she offered. "Terms, peace, alliance, even marriage, Sansa to a Tyrell cousin, Arya perhaps too." Cat stood. "The last alliance brought Ned to the block. You'll forgive me if I decline." That same day, Jaime Lannister was delivered to the capital in chains, escorted by Brynden Blackfish Tully himself. Edmure had disobeyed orders. Instead of holding Jaime, he brought him as a prize, hoping to force a public execution, to boost morale. But Robb refused. "We hold him," Robb said. "We don't kill a lion until we know how many cubs are hiding in the rocks." Arya wanted him dead. Catelyn said nothing. Roose Bolton smiled slightly. That night, inside a candlelit cell, Jaime Lannister laughed when he saw Robb. "So, the wolf thinks he's a king now. Took the throne, did you? How does it feel?" Robb stared at him, voice quiet, like "I'd rather burn it than sit on it." Jaime tilted his head. "Then burn it, or someone else will. You think you've won. The game doesn't end when You take the city. It starts. Before Robb could speak, Jaime leaned forward, eyes gleaming. You should have killed me when you had the chance. And then he whispered something else, something that turned Robb pale. 2 words, Tywin's. Coming. The morning after Jaime's chilling warning, a new sound filled the air of King's Landing. The horns of war. 3 short blasts from the western watchtower, then a bell from the harbour, then silence again. Robb rushed to the ramparts of Maegor's Holdfast, wind tugging his cloak. Far out on the King's Road, just beyond the horizon, dust clouds swirled like angry spirits. Tywin Lannister was coming. No letters, no parley, no envoys, just the Lion's army, tens of thousands. Strong, marching straight for the capital with one clear message: no compromise. No mercy, and unlike Stannis, Tywin wasn't relying on wildfire or loyalty. He had coin, he had steel, he had rage. Robb summoned his war council immediately. Greyjohn Umber slammed a fist on the table. Let him come. We'll feed his bones. To the crows. Roose Bolton, cool as ever, countered. We're outnumbered, Your Grace. Our men are stretched thin across the city. Our food stores are barely holding. And this is not open field. This is a siege trap waiting to happen. Lord Ryman Frey agreed, but not for Robb's sake. The city turns on us by the hour. You can't hold it and fight Tywin. Choose one. Robb stood silent. Arya was in the corner, arms folded, staring at them all like she saw ghosts. Maybe she did. Catelyn broke the silence. We don't have time to fight and win. We have time to survive. But survive how? Surrender, flee. Varys appeared uninvited that night, drifting into the war room like mist. I suggest, he said carefully, you give Tywin something he doesn't expect. A reason to pause. Robb turned to him slowly. And what does he fear? Varys gave a quiet, poisonous smile. Chaos, public disgrace, a dead heir. At first, Robb didn't understand. Then he did. Jaime, the Lannisters, had no king anymore. Joffrey had disappeared. Tommen was too young. Myrcella was across the sea. But Jaime was Tywin's legacy. His pride, his shame. Robb made his choice. That night, a raven flew out of the Red Keep with a simple message. Approach this city, and your son dies. The Kingslayer bleeds. Before your eyes, there was no signature, just a seal, the direwolf of House Stark. Tywin's response never came by letter, but his army stopped, camped 6 leagues away from the city. Tents rose like a forest of death. Fires lit the dark, sky like falling stars. Tywin didn't attack, not yet. He waited, and that was more terrifying than an assault. Inside the capital, things got worse. Riots broke out in Flea Bottom. Word had spread. The Wolf King had taken the Red Keep, but Tywin Lannister was coming. The small folk didn't care who ruled. They only feared who would punish them. Robb sent riders to restore order, but too many gold cloaks had turned coat too fast. Loyalty ran shallow in King's Landing. Sansa, under Tyrell protection, was moved again, this time to the Sept of Baelor, disguised as a handmaid. She prayed every day not to be rescued, but that her brother would abandon the city before it was too late. Arya, meanwhile, was becoming someone else entirely. She'd slipped out of the keep more than once, cloaked in a stable boy's tunic. No one recognized her. She watched executions, thieves getting hanged, Lannister soldiers stabbed in alleys, men wearing her father's name getting drunk in brothels. She returned to the keep one night, eyes like glass, and said, "They don't care who wins. They just want blood." Robb knew then this city would never love him. Not now, not ever. But he wasn't here for love. He was here for justice. The next day, Jaime Lannister was dragged to the courtyard in chains. Thousands gathered to watch. Robb stepped forward, sword drawn, and held it to Jaime's throat. "I don't want your father's throne," he said, loud and clear. "But I'll bury his legacy if he forces my hand." Jaime didn't flinch. He just smiled. "You already have." And from the crowd, a single crossbow bolt fired. Not at Jaime, but at Robb. It missed, but not by much. The crowd scattered. Chaos erupted. And above the Red Keep, for the first time in weeks, the Lannister banner fluttered. Someone had raised it in the night. The city was no longer just occupied. It was boiling, and Tywin had yet to make his move. The chaos after the assassination attempt didn't fade. It festered. King's Landing no longer belonged to anyone. Robb Stark may have held the Red Keep, but the streets were ruled by fear, whispers, and knives in the dark. The bolt that had nearly ended his life had come from the crowd, but the assassin was never found. Some blamed the Lannisters. Others blamed the Freys. Arya, with quiet fury, blamed Varys. The next morning, a corpse was found hung from the gates of the keep, a gold cloak, his hands nailed to the wood, a parchment tied to his foot. One king is no better than another. Robb stood over the body, jaw clenched, knuckles white. Every instinct in him screamed to ride out, to take the fight to Tywin, to end this in blood and fire. But he couldn't. Not here, not like this. Roose Bolton approached him later in the war chamber. His voice was calm, quiet, deadly. "You should have killed Jaime Lannister the moment you entered this city. You let honor delay the inevitable. That's weakness, and your enemies see it." Robb turned on him. "You think butchering a man in chains earns me respect?" Roose gave the faintest smile. "No, your grace, but it buys you fear, and right. Now, fear is currency." That night, Sansa Stark was brought secretly to the Red Keep by Brienne of Tarth. The Tyrells had abandoned her in silence, claiming ignorance of her location when questioned by Stark men. But Brienne, refusing to leave her behind, risked everything to return her to family. When Robb saw her for a brief moment, he looked like a boy again. Not a king, not a general, just a brother. They embraced, wordless. Arya stood in the corner, arms crossed, watching them both with a guarded stare. But the reunion didn't bring hope, only new weight. With all three Stark children now inside the keep, the city had become a noose around Robb's neck. The moment Tywin Lannister learned this, he would tighten it, and he did. 2 days later, a rider came under a banner of peace. A Lannister captain, grim-faced and battered, handed Robb a sealed scroll with the lion's golden wax. It read, "You have my son. I have your home. The north burns as you play king in a city that spits at your feet. I will trade one for the other, Jaime for Winterfell, or I will send your brother's bones in a box." It was signed in Tywin's hand. Robb felt his blood freeze. Bran, Rickon Winterfell. The scroll had been sent days ago. How long had Tywin known? How long had he waited to twist the knife? Catelyn was the first to speak. "He's bluffing," Roose disagreed. "Tywin Lannister does not bluff. If he says he holds Winterfell, then it's already ash." The council argued for hours. Some said execute Jaime. Others said march north and leave the city behind. Some, including Roose, quietly offered a third option: Kill the hostages, burn what you can, and run before Tywin lays siege. But Robb had gone quiet. That night, he stood in the godswood of the Red Keep, a place few visited. Arya found him there. He didn't look up. "I've lost everything," he said. Arya didn't comfort him. "You haven't lost," she said. "Not yet. But you have to stop pretending you're fighting one war. There's not just North and South anymore. There's survival, and that's it." He turned to her. "You've changed. So have you," she replied. "But only one of us is pretending not to." Later that night, Robb made his decision. At dawn, he walked into Jaime Lannister's cell. The Kingslayer was chained, tired, but amused. "I assume you're here to kill me," he said with a smile, "or beg." Robb didn't smile back. "I'm sending you home," he said flatly. "But not for peace, not for mercy." Jaime raised an eyebrow. "Then why?" Robb stepped closer, his voice low, dangerous. "Because I want Tywin Lannister to see your face when he realizes his house is crumbling from the inside." Outside the cell, Roose Bolton waited in the shadows, watching with unreadable eyes. And far beyond the city walls, Tywin Lannister stood in his golden tent, already planning the siege. The storm was almost here, and the blood would follow. The raven carrying Robb Stark's reply flew into Tywin Lannister's war camp just before sunrise. It bore no long message, no titles, no courtesy, only a simple declaration, scrawled in Robb's hand. "Jaime Lannister returns, alone, touch the north, and he dies for real next time." Tywin read it once, then again. He didn't blink, didn't curse, didn't even look up as his cupbearer trembled beside him. Instead, he whispered, "So the boy plays chess." Jaime was released at the crack of dawn, escorted only by a dozen riders until he passed the edge of the city's reach. From there, he was left to find his own way, bruised but alive, armed but watched. What Robb didn't know, or perhaps did, was that the Kingslayer carried more than Lannister blood. He carried information. He had seen the unrest in the city, the cracks in Robb's army, the way the phrase whispered behind closed doors, and how the North was stretched so thin it might snap. Tywin would use that. Inside King's Landing, Robb knew he had bought time, but at a price. The people hated him more than ever now, accusing him of parling with the very lions they thought he'd come to destroy. His soldiers were tense, the phrase grumbling loudly, and the streets grew more dangerous by the hour. 2 gold cloaks were found murdered in the alley behind the Street of Steel, flayed and nailed to a wall. A calling card. Roose Bolton denied involvement. Robb didn't believe him. Worse still, supplies were dwindling. The city couldn't feed itself, even under the best of kings. And now, with the roads blocked and Riverland's raiders stealing grain, meant for the capital, hunger clawed at the gates. Robb summoned his commanders again. "We need to leave the city," Edmure said first, grim-faced. "We'll lose everything if we stay." Greatjon Umber slammed the table. "We hold the capital or we die trying. We didn't ride through hell just to tuck tail." Catelyn was more measured. "We cannot rule a kingdom from a grave. The North must be your priority, not this cursed city." But Sansa surprised them all. She stood, quiet until then, and said, "Then burn it." All heads turned. Even Arya stared. Sansa looked at her brother. "You can't hold King's Landing, but you can make sure no one else does either. Burn the food, salt the wells. Tear down the gates. If you leave it broken." Robb stared at her. The girl he remembered was gone. Only a woman remained, one shaped by Cersei, Joffrey, and the court that had murdered their father. He didn't answer her directly, not yet, but that night he gave his orders. The Red Keep's vaults were emptied. Scrolls, books, gold, anything of value packed onto wagons bound for the north. The Iron Throne itself was not destroyed, but it was taken apart, melted down partially by wildfire and hammer, a symbol of rule shattered by the one who never sat on it. Arya asked why he didn't destroy it completely. Robb said, because someday, someone might deserve it. As the evacuation began, something else happened. Roose Bolton vanished. No warning, no word. His men remained, but their eyes were distant, cold. Frey riders started disappearing too, taking gold and horses. The betrayal wasn't loud. It was quiet, surgical. Robb had known it was coming. He just hadn't expected it so soon. By the third day, the capital was a ghost. Flea Bottom burned. The septs were locked. The bells didn't ring. They were torn down by Stark loyalists to prevent any call to arms. Robb left behind no garrison, no stewards, just ashes and dust. When Tywin Lannister's army marched into King's Landing, they found nothing but smouldering stone, collapsed bridges, and poisoned wells. Even the ravens had been slaughtered. He stood in the throne room, now gutted and blackened, and looked at where the Iron Throne used to be. A message carved into the floor with Valyrian steel. We are not your subjects. A stark Tywin stared at it for a long time. Then he said, so be it. But the war was far from over. The North was in flames. The Boltons had betrayed, and Robb Stark was riding home to reclaim a kingdom that might no longer exist. The return to the North was nothing like Robb had imagined. No cheers, no banners, no home. They crossed the neck in silence, riding through burned-out villages and abandoned watchposts. At Moat Cailin they found only corpses, ironborn and northern alike, tangled in the mud, their bodies rotting beneath flies and broken spears. The Freys who had stayed behind guarded the path northward like dogs with blood on their snouts. Robb said nothing as they passed, but the truth hung in the air like smoke. The Boltons had taken Winterfell. Theon Greyjoy had started it, storming the castle with ironborn treachery, taking Bran and Rickon hostage. But the real betrayal came when Roose Bolton sent his bastard Ramsay Snow to liberate the castle. Ramsay had taken it all right, and then he had flayed it. The ravens said Winterfell burned for days, that the trees screamed, that wolves were skinned and hung beside children. Robb's fingers gripped the reins tighter with each mile. When they reached the ruins of Winterfell, the sight nearly broke him. The towers were blackened husks, the great hall a collapsed skeleton of stone. The godswood had been hacked to pieces, the heart tree cut down and burned, and on the walls, painted in blood and ash, were the flayed men of House Bolton. They didn't find any trace of Bran or Rickon. Not their bones, not their bodies, only rumours. One wildling said they had fled north, beyond the wall. Another claimed a farmer hid them, only to be hanged by Bolton men. The truth was smoke, and Robb had no wind to blow it clear. The worst part wasn't the castle. It was the silence of the North. No lords met them. No ravens answered. The Manderleys in White Harbour had closed their gates. The Karstarks refused to send men. Even the Glovers and the Tallhearts were quiet. The North had bled too much for a war they no longer believed in. They blamed Robb. They blamed his crown. They blamed the South and everything it had poisoned. It was in the burned-out crypts of Winterfell where Robb Stark made his final decision. He gathered what few loyal bannermen he had left, Umber, Mormont, a few scattered clansmen, and stood before the empty tomb of his father. He didn't speak of vengeance. He didn't promise glory. He only said one thing: never again. And from that night forward, his war changed. No more sieges, no more banners, no more cities. Robb Stark became a ghost. He vanished from the maps, slipped into the woods and snow with his loyal few. They struck like wolves in the dark, raiding Bolton supply lines, freeing prisoners, burning down keeps loyal to the flayed man. Small victories, but they piled up like bones. The North whispered a new name now, the Direwolf King, not a ruler, a shadow. But even shadows can be hunted. In the Dreadfort, Ramsay Snow laughed when he heard the tales. Let him come, he told his men. I'll flay the rest of him. But he was afraid. Deep down, because wolves don't knock at your gate. They wait until you're bleeding, then rip your throat out. In White Harbour, Lord Wyman Manderley finally broke his silence. He sent food, ships, men, quietly, carefully. But it was enough. Enough for Robb to begin again. Arya had vanished by then. No one knew where. Some said she crossed the sea. Others said she became a killer in the woods, wearing Bolton faces like masks. Sansa stayed in the shadows of the northern court, playing the noble lady while passing secrets under cloaks. She fed names to Robb's riders, loyalists, traitors, weak links in Bolton chains. And slowly, piece by piece, the North remembered who it was, not ruled by fear, not ruled by blood, but ruled by honor and the memory of a dead wolf whose sun was not yet done howling. Winter came. It didn't roar in with storms or white winds. It crept slow, merciless, like death, with cold hands. The rivers froze. Roads vanished beneath snowdrifts. Even the crows fell silent. And under that silence, the final reckoning began. Robb Stark, once king in the north, once the conqueror of King's Landing, now returned not as ruler, but as retribution. The North was tired, torn between fear and forgotten oaths. But that winter reminded them of who they were. The Boltons, no matter their sigil, were never Northmen in truth. They ruled with pain, not pride. And pain makes enemies in every shadow. At night, the flames began. First, the Dreadfort's outposts. Watchtowers along the weeping water burned to the ground. Then came the dogs. The kennel masters found hanged, tongues cut out. One by one, Bolton loyalists were hunted, skin flayed from their own backs, left nailed to trees with a single carved symbol above the corpses. Lady Mage Mormont rode through the snow with her daughters, reclaiming Bear Island. The Hornwoods revolted. In secret, even the Karstarks, broken and bitter, turned on the Boltons when one of their lords was burned alive for questioning. And then came the night Winterfell rose again. It was no grand army, just a pack of wolves. Robb, Greatjon, a host of mountain clans. Sansa, riding under the banner of her mother's house, leading negotiations with the wavering lords. Glover, men, Reed scouts from the swamps, silent, deadly, determined. They struck during the longest night of the year. No moon, just white snow and red torches. Ramsay Snow was in bed with a northern girl he'd stolen from her home when the first arrow slammed through his window. He didn't die quickly. Robb didn't allow that. They dragged Ramsay through the ruined Great Hall of Winterfell, now reclaimed stone by stone, and tied him to the heart tree, or what was left of it. Sansa stood beside Robb. "He deserves more," she said, voice low. "I know," Robb replied, "but the North doesn't." Ramsay's screams echoed for hours. When they stopped, the snow was red beneath the tree. The next morning, Robb Stark stood atop the battlements. For the first time since the war began, the banners of House Stark flew above Winterfell, not as conquerors, not as kings, as home. The Northern Lords came, one by one, Wyman Manderley, Lady Mormont, Lord Glover, even the Karstarks, blood-stained and hesitant, bent the knee. And when they asked Robb if he would reclaim the crown, he said only, "No. The crown lost us everything, but I will be Lord of Winterfell if you'll have me, and my son will know peace." They knelt, not to a king, to a Stark. Arya returned weeks later, face cold, eyes colder. She didn't speak of where she'd gone or what she'd done, but she smiled once when she saw the Stark banners flying again. Sansa remained at Winterfell, advising Robb quietly, carefully, no longer a pawn but a strategist. And when the spring sun broke the last snow, the children of the North played again in the shadow of rebuilt towers. But some wounds never fully heal. Every year, Robb walked alone to the crypts. He left no offerings, spoke no words, just stood before his father's tomb, the cold stone of Eddard Stark watching over the now free North. And deep in the south, in a capital still scarred by fire, a new king sat on a rebuilt throne, Tommen Baratheon, puppet of the Lannisters, shadowed by gold and lies. They ruled, but they didn't win, because the wolf didn't need the throne. He just needed to make sure the lions would never sleep easy again